As you heard, my name is Koen, and for the last 2 years, I've been the lead facilitator of AM Horizons Training Group, and actually not only the lead facilitator, actually one of 2 employees. So I get to tell myself what to do all the time, and I don't appreciate it. Before that, I was the diversity officer for Anoka County, and many of you know where Anoka County is. Woohoo! I love my time at the county. Before that, I taught I worked at a number of private colleges, and then I worked in high schools. So I was a high school teacher and a middle school teacher. And let me tell you, after you've worked in middle school and high school, you're good to go. I mean, there's not much more left to do. You know, so I'm thankful for those opportunities, and those opportunities actually, particularly in the last year, knowing that I'm coming to MSSA, I try to come up with some new stuff because there are a lot of people who have heard of me and seen me, and I don't want them going, tell me again. And so this piece of work actually came from doing some work and really trying to figure out why people behave the way they do. And so Archie Bunker, the great American hero, is kind of what we'll talk about. What do you think, or what are you hoping that this conversation will be about? What are your thoughts about this, or what do you hope that this conversation will be about? Yes. So understanding prejudice, okay? Yes. Okay, so how things have changed since Archie Bunker's time, right? Someone said discrimination, all right?
How do you engage with people who are prejudiced without trying to railroad their ideas?
So how to interact with people who are prejudiced without railroading their ideas and then overshadowing them with your ideas, right? I mean, I added that to what you're saying. Okay, cool. Anything else that you hope this conversation would be about? All right, then let's get started. So some of us actually don't know a whole lot about Archie Bunker. So for those of us who grew up watching him on Wednesdays at 8, 9 Central Standard, describe for me Archie Bunker. Why does he become a part of our conversation?
It's a stereotype of a lot of individuals who have the same beliefs.
So he was a stereotype of a lot of individuals who had a particular belief. Yes, sir? He was honest. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Very stuck in his ways, not open to other opinions.
Okay, he was very stuck in his ways and not very open to other opinions. Other thoughts? It was almost, your hand was almost up. That counts, though. She was like, okay.
I didn't know him in that capacity, but I think it's very interesting to hear that, and I can someone see that very, one of these issues with their long hair and stuff like that. So.
Okay, so a very dogmatic kind of person, and someone like someone in your family. Okay, yes, ma'am.
I do about that. I personally never, maybe I've seen it once. I really just don't remember. My grandfather, I watched that show a lot.
Okay, so your grandfather watched the show a lot. All right, cool. Yes, ma'am.
He showed his love through his family with a lot of sarcastic humor.
Okay, so he showed love through sarcastic humor. All right. Yes.
I've seen it, and I think he didn't like the change at that time. Things were changing. He didn't like it.
Okay, so he reflected that times were changing and he did not necessarily like those changes. There was one more hand.
Well, I grew up watching that.
Okay. Okay, so he didn't like to challenge his own thinking, and anything that was a challenge, he just didn't think was right. Yes.
Well, and the show was really pointing out the futility of his kind of thought. I
Okay.
mean, the creators of it did not endorse his thoughts. He was the object of humor based on his thought.
So he was the object of humor based on his thought, and that the show was designed to show the futility of that way of thinking, right? So how useless it is to even think that way, right? Cool. So those are some of that's some background that we can start working with as we move forward and having this conversation about Archie Bunker, the greatest American, or the great American hero. So, one of the things we have to remember is that context is everything. And so this television show was presented at a very pivotal moment in American history. So in the 60s, what happened in the 60s? A lot, right? So just tell me a few things of the lots of things that happened in the 60s. So there were lots of protests.
Civil rights movement.
The civil rights movement really
Sexual revolution.
the sexual revolution, the civil rights movement, Vietnam. So the 60s were a real time of turmoil in the United States. Nobody mentioned any of the assassinations in the 60s. The 60s was full of a time of that kind of revolution kind of stuff going on. The thing that's important to recognize was that in the 60s we had all this revolution. That stuff started to taper off because we started getting laws on the books that gave people rights and access to things that didn't have access before. And then what happens in the 70s? Somebody said disco. Don't leave me away. Okay, so outside of disco, but socially, what is starting to happen in the 70s?
Women return to work.
So women return to work. What else?
Korean War.
The Korean War.
No.
Nixon's resignation. So no Korean War, but Nixon did resign. Watergate. Right? So all these things that we fought for in the 60s that became laws started becoming what in the 70s? Normal. Became reality. Right? So all this theoretical stuff, we got all these laws passed. Now in the 70s, these things become actionable. And so we have people taking advantage of, and I mean this in the most positive way, but we have people taking the opportunities that affirmative action is now offering. And so our workplaces are starting to look different. We're developing these little monsters called latchkey kids. Right? I was one of them. So these dynamics of what the traditional 50s family was supposed to be has been transformed through the 60s, and now it's manifesting in the 70s. And so Archie Bunker, as a character, this show starts in the mid to late 70s and into the 80s. And so understanding that context allows you to understand what Norman Lear and those folks were trying to get at when developing this character. And I will tell you, they were actually surprised at the success of this character, which is another comment about our American system of relationships. So we're very complex in our simplistic beliefs, right? So the context is important. So on your paper, what I'd like for you to do is I want you to construct something that most of you as social workers or helpers in the field have probably seen or done yourselves, and that is a genogram. So if you don't have a handout, let me know. I have some up here, and I can get you some. All right, hold on.
Andre, can we get one?
My grandmother used to say it, closed mouth, never gets fed. If you need one, I'll give you one. So basically, the genogram is basically kind of your family's history. And what I'd like you to do is to start with yourself and go out about 3 generations, if you will, and talk about those relationships in terms of drawing a map of any of those relationships. So deaths, or major events in the family, like deaths or births or marriages, if you can denote those in any kind of way you want in your genogram. If there are things like habitual things like alcoholism or maybe possible abuse or huge successes like degrees or whatnot, just take a couple of minutes and do your own genogram. One thing you might want to keep in mind is that we'll have a conversation about this in terms of prejudice, bigotry, and discrimination. So at some point we'll turn to those 3 things as we look at your genogram as well.